I had drowsed away that afternoon, and now I could not sleep. I lay tossing and turning in his ancestral bed until another daybreak discoloured the dozen mirrors that were iridescent with the reflections of the sea, and the perfume of the lilies weighed on my senses. When I thought that, henceforth, I would always share these sheets with a man whose skin, as theirs did, contained that toad-like, clammy hint of moisture, I felt a vague desolation that within me, now my female wound had healed, that there had awoken certain queasy cravings, like the cravings of a pregnant woman for the taste of coal or chalk or tainted food, for the renewal of his caress. Had he not hinted to me, in his flesh as in his speech and looks, of the thousand baroque intersections of flesh upon flesh? I lay in our wide bed, accompanied by a sleepless companion, my dark, newborn curiosity. I lay in bed alone, and I longed for him, and he disgusted me. Were there jewels enough in all his safes to recompense me for this predicament? Did all that castle hold enough riches to recompense me for the company of the libertine with whom I must share it? And what, precisely, was the nature of my desirous dread for the mysterious being who, to show his mastery over me, had abandoned me on my wedding night? And then I sat up straight in bed, under the sardonic masks of the gargoyles carved above me, riven by a wild surmise. Might he have left me, not for Wall Street, but for an importunate mistress tucked away God knows where, who knew how to pleasure him far better than a girl whose fingers had been exercised hitherto only by the practice of scales or arpeggios? And slowly, soothed, I sank back onto the heaping pillows. I acknowledged that the jealous scare I'd just given myself was not unmixed with a little tincture of relief. At last I drifted into slumber as daylight filled the room and chased bad dreams away. But the last thing I remembered before I slept was the tall jar of lilies beside the bed, how the thick glass distorted their fat stems so they looked like arms, dismembered arms, drifting downward in greenish water. Coffee and croissants to console this bridal, solitary waking. Delicious. Honey, too, in a section of comb on a glass saucer. The maid squeezed the aromatic juice from an orange into a chilled goblet, while I watched her as I lay in the lazy midday bed of the rich. Yet nothing this morning gave me more than a fleeting pleasure, except to hear that the piano tuner had been at work already. When the maid told me that, I sprang out of bed, pulled on my old serge skirt and flannel blouse, costume of a student, in which I felt far more at ease with myself than in any of my fine new clothes. After my 3 hours of practice, I called the piano tuner in to thank him. He was blind, of course, but young, with a gentle mouth and grey eyes that fixed upon me, although they could not see me. He was a blacksmith's son from the village across the causeway, a chorister in the church whom the good priest had taught a trade so that he could make a living. All most satisfactory. Yes, he thought he would be happy here. And if, he added shyly, he might sometimes be allowed to hear me play. For, you see, he loved music. Yes, of course, I said. Certainly. He seemed to know that I had smiled. After I dismissed him, even though I'd awoken so late, it was still barely time for my 5 o'clock. The housekeeper, who, thoughtfully forewarned by my husband, had restrained herself from interrupting my music, now made me a solemn visitation with a lengthy menu for late luncheon. When I told her I did not need it, she looked at me obliquely, along her nose. I understood at once that my principal functions of a chatelaine was to provide work for the staff. But all the same, I asserted myself and said that I would wait until dinner time, although I looked forward nervously to the solitary meal. Then I found I had to tell her what I would like to have prepared for me. My imagination, still that of a schoolgirl, ran riot. A fowl and cream? Or should I anticipate Christmas with a varnished turkey? No, I have decided. Avocado and shrimp, lots of it, followed by no entree at all, but surprise me for dessert with every ice cream in the icebox. She noted all down, but sniffed. I'd shocked her. Such tastes. Child that I was, I giggled. But now, what shall I do now? I could have spent a happy hour unpacking the trunks that contained my trousseau, but the maid had done that already. The dresses the tailor-mades hung in the wardrobe in my dressing room, the hats on wooden heads to keep their shape, the shoes on wooden feet, as if all these inanimate objects were imitating the appearance of life, to mock me. I did not like to linger in my overcrowded dressing room, nor in my lugubriously lily-scented bedroom. How shall I pass the time? I shall take a bath in my own bathroom, and found the taps were little dolphins made of gold with chips of turquoise for eyes. And there was a tank of goldfish who swam in and out of moving fronds of weeds, as bored, I thought, as I was. How I wished he had not left me. How I wished it were possible to chat with, say, a maid or the piano tuner. But I already knew that my rank forbade overtures of friendship to the staff. I'd been hoping to defer the call as long as I could, so that I could have something to look forward to in the dead waste of time I saw behind me. After my dinner was done with, but at 7:15, when darkness already surrounded the castle, I could contain myself no further. I telephoned my mother, and astonished myself by bursting into tears when I heard her voice.
No, nothing was the matter. Mother, I have gold bath taps. I said gold bath taps. No. I suppose that is nothing to cry about, Mother.
The line was bad. I could hardly make out her congratulations, her questions, her concerns, but I was a little comforted when I put the receiver down. Yet there still remained 1 whole hour to dinner, and the whole unimaginable desert of the rest of the evening. The bunch of keys lay where he'd left them, on the rug before the library fire, which had warmed them metal so that they no longer felt cold to the touch, but warm, almost as my own skin. How careless I was. A maid tending the logs eyed me reproachfully, as if I'd set a trap for her as I picked up the clinking bundle of keys, the keys to the interior doors of this lovely prison, of which I was both the inmate and the mistress, and had scarcely seen. When I remembered that, I felt the exhilaration of the explorer. Lights! More lights! At the touch of a switch, the dreaming library was brilliantly illuminated. I ran crazily around the castle, switching on every light I could find. I ordered the servants to light up all their quarters too, so the castle would shine like a sea-born birthday cake with 1,000 candles, 1 for every year of its life, and everybody on shore would wonder at it. When everything was lit as brightly as the café in Gare du Nord, the significance of the possessions implied that a bunch of keys no longer intimidated me, for I was determined now to search through all of them for evidence of my husband's true nature. His office, first, evidently. A mahogany desk 1/2 mile wide, with an impeccable blotter and bank of telephones. I allowed myself the luxury of opening the safe that contained the jewellery and delved sufficiently among the leather boxes to find out how my marriage had given me access to a Jin's treasury. Boroughs, bracelets, rings. While I was thus surrounded by diamonds, a maid knocked on the door and entered before I spoke. A subtle discourtesy. I would speak to my husband about it. She eyed my skirt superciliously. Did Madame plan to dress for dinner? She made a moue of disdain when I laughed at her, She was far more the lady than I. But, imagine, to dress up in one of my extravagances, with a jewelled turban and aigrette on my head, roped with a pearl to the navel, to sit down all alone in the baronial dining-room at the head of that massive board at which King Mark was reputed to have fed his knights. I grew calmer under the cold eye of her disapproval. I adopted the crisp inflections of an officer's daughter. No, I would not dress for dinner. Furthermore, I was not hungry enough for dinner itself. She must tell the housekeeper to cancel the dormitory feast I'd ordered. Could they leave me sandwiches and a flask of coffee in my music room? And they would all dismiss for the night. Merci, madame. I knew by her bereft intonation that I had let them down again, but I did not care. I was armed against them by the brilliance of this hoard. I would not find his heart amongst the glittering stones. As soon as she'd gone, I began a systematic search of the drawers in his chest. All was in order, so I found nothing. Not a random doodle on an old envelope, nor the faded photograph of a woman. Only the files of business correspondence, the bills from home farms, the invoices from tailors, the billets d'heure from international financiers. Nothing. And this absence of evidence of his real life began to impress me strangely. There must, I thought, be a great deal to conceal if he takes such pains to hide it. His office was a singularly impersonal room, facing inwards on the courtyard, as though he wanted to turn his back on the siren sea in order to keep a clear head while he bankrupted a small businessman in Amsterdam, or, I noticed with a thrill of distaste, engaged in some business in Laos that must, from certain cryptic references to his amateur botanist enthusiasm for rare poppies, be to do with opium. Was he not rich enough to do without crime? Or was the crime, in itself, his profit? And yet I saw enough to appreciate his zeal for secrecy. Now that I had ransacked his desk, I must spend a cool-headed quarter of an hour putting every last letter back where I'd found it, as I covered the traces of my visit. By some chance, as I reached inside the little drawer that had stuck fast, I must have touched upon a hidden spring, for a secret drawer flew open within that drawer itself, and this secret drawer contained, at last, a file marked personal. I was alone but for my reflection in the uncurtained window. I had the brief notion that his heart, pressed flat as a flower, crimson, and thin as tissue paper, lay in this file. It was a very thin one. I could have wished, perhaps, I had not found that touching, ill-spelt note on a paper napkin marked La Coupole that began, "My darling, I cannot wait for the moment when you make me yours completely." The diva had sent him a page of the score of Tristan, with a single cryptic word, "until," sprawled across it. But the strangest of all these love letters was a postcard with a view of a village graveyard among the mountains, where some black-coated ghoul enthusiastically dug at a grave. This little scene, executed with lurid exuberance, was captioned, "Typical Transylvanian scene, midnight, All Hallows," and on the other side the message, "On this occasion of this marriage to the descendant of Dracula, always remember, the supreme and unique pleasure of love is the certainty that one is doing evil. Du amitié, si." A joke. A joke in the worst possible taste, for had he not been married to a Romanian countess? And then I remembered her pretty, witty face and her name, Camilla. My most recent predecessor in this castle had been, it would seem, the most sophisticated. I put away the file, sobered. Nothing in my life of family love and music had prepared me for these grown-up games, and yet these were clues to his self that showed me, at least, how much he had been loved, even if they did not reveal any good reason for it. But still, I wanted to know more, and as I closed the office door and locked it, the means to discover more fell in my way. Fell, indeed, and with the clatter of a dropped canteen of cutlery for, as I turned the slick Yale lock, I contrived somehow to open up the keyring itself, so that all the keys tumbled loose on the floor. And the very first key I picked up out of that pile was, as luck or ill fortune had it, the key to the room he had forbidden me, the room he would keep for his own, so that he could go there when he wished to feel himself once more a bachelor. I made my decision to explore it before I felt a faint resurgence of my ill-defined fear for his waxen stillness. Perhaps I had half imagined then that I might find his real self in his den, waiting there to see if I indeed had obeyed him, that he had sent a moving figure of himself to New York, the enigmatic, self-sustaining carapace of this public person, while the real man, whose face I had glimpsed in the storm of orgasm, occupied himself with pressing private business in the study at the foot of the West Tower, behind the still room. Yet, if that was so, it was imperative that I should find him, should know him. And I was too deluded by his apparent taste for me to think my disobedience might truly offend him. I took the forbidden key from the heap and left the others lying there.